Imagine, morning in a quiet Swabian village. A woman with a basket goes out to fetch water. Fog hangs over the rooftops. Bells ring out from the church. Everything looks normal. But by evening, her name will be on the list of witches. She will not return home. No evidence or witnesses are needed. A sidelong glance from the priest or a word from a neighbor is enough to turn an ordinary woman into a witch. Witch hunts always grew out of ordinary life. One rumor, and fear spreads through the community. Remember Elwangen in 1611. In a few weeks, more than 400 people were executed there, including pregnant women. The mechanism was simple: rumor, arrest, sentence, fire, and so on and so forth. In some districts, the names of suspects were posted on the doors of the town hall. In the morning, you would greet people in the square, and in the evening, you would see your name written in chalk under the inscription, confirmed under torture. What is more frightening? Waiting for your turn or seeing the name of your mother, wife, or child there? That's how an ordinary day turned into a death sentence. And the worst part was that this was only the beginning. What began at the end of the 15th century lasted 300 years and spread throughout Europe, from monastery cells to city squares. A dark monastery cell in Speyer, late 15th century. A candle flickers. Ink spreads across yellow parchment. Dominican friar Heinrich Kramer leans over the table and writes a text that will become a death sentence for tens of thousands. The book will be called Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. It states in black and white, women are weaker in body and soul, therefore more susceptible to spells and the temptations of the devil. The phrase is in the manuscript, but for Europe it will become an explosion. This book quickly becomes a bestseller of the 16th century. Dozens of reprints. It is read by judges, priests, and university professors. Each page serves as an instruction manual. How to interrogate, how to expose, how to punish. Printing spreads it faster than any refutation. Consider the scale. From a monastery cell to the huge courtrooms in Würzburg or Trier. A man in a robe holds the hammer of witches and says, "It is written, so it must be." As a result, in a few decades, almost 900 people were executed in Würzburg in 5 years. Among them were children. Ask yourself, how could it happen that a book weighs more than a human life? Thus began an era when words became weapons, when text in a manuscript set fire to public squares. But the real horror was yet to come, because the book would be followed by arrests, and then the word would become flesh in ropes, shackles, and flames. At dawn, a cart stops at the gate. 2 men in cloaks read the order. The woman's hands are tied with rope. The basket falls. The eggs roll across the cobblestones and crack. The sound is so quiet that it sticks in your memory. Arrest has always been a spectacle. People needed to see, here is the punishment, here is the example. Fear worked better on the public. In the interrogation room, everyone had their role. The judge in his robe, the priest with questions about the soul, the clerk who wrote down every word, and the accused herself, a small figure in the center, doomed to endure the stares of others. The methods were harsh. The water test. The bound woman was thrown into the river. Would she drown or not? If she drowned, she was innocent, although often already dead. If she stayed afloat, she was a witch, and there was only one path, fire. Even when the church banned this cold water trial, communities continued to use it because popular belief outlived the decrees. Instruments: the Spanish boot, screw vices for fingers, the stretching rack, hands in iron rings, tears falling on stone. A scream that became currency. A scream could change testimony. Ask yourself, what is more frightening, pain or the fact that after it you have to name your mother, neighbor, child? The line was disappearing. Torture demanded not only confessions, but also new names. Each name named was a new arrest warrant. A small snowball turned into an avalanche. In Würzburg, even children confessed that they had flown to a Sabbath. 9-year-old voices became evidence. Who made them talk? Fear, pain, pressure. They were kept in basements for weeks. People came out changed, broken, or didn't come out at all. And alongside this, calculations were made. How much wood for the fire? How many candles would be needed for night interrogations? how much the executioner would receive for his work. Note the detail. The trials turned into a business of fear. The square became a stage, and horror became a commodity paid for by the community. By the end of the day, everything was ready. The wood was stacked, the people were gathered. The flames were called purification. But while some watched the fire, somewhere in the city new lists were already being prepared. Those who named others thought they had saved themselves. But did any of them really save themselves? A dark courtroom. A child sits on the bench. She is 9 years old. Her gaze wanders over the faces of the adults. Her hands tremble. And she says, "I flew to the Sabbath with my neighbor." This is not a game or a fairy tale. This is a line in the protocol. And that line means execution. That was how the logic of the time worked. The judges wrote down the words. The clerks compiled them into registers, and the paper became evidence. Würzburg, 1626 to 1631. About 900 people executed. Among them were children, students, even priests. Hear the paradox. They all confessed to the impossible. Why? Because pain dictated the answers. Torture broke not only the body but also the imagination. Imagine a basement. Your hands in shackles. The same question over and over again. Who else was there with you? And in the end, you name your neighbor to stop the pain. Then someone else. Every word becomes a new order. Ask yourself, what is worse, to betray a loved one or to continue screaming in pain? The protocols triggered an avalanche. One name led to dozens more. Villages were emptied. There were no families left untouched by fear. Today, we read these documents in the archives of Bamberg or Würzburg. Yellowed pages, faded ink. And behind every word is a face. A child who never flew. A woman who never brewed potions. A man who just wanted to protect his family. Back then, no one saw this. They only saw texts that reinforced themselves. The circle was complete. The protocols became truth, and truth became a verdict. And here the question arises. What is more frightening? Words squeezed out by screams, or the calm signatures of those who believed those words? Nearby, in the cities, fear was gaining momentum. The stake was no longer an exception. It was becoming the norm. 1628, Bamberg. It is not a peasant woman, a widow, or a suspicious herbalist who is led out to the square. It is the burgomaster, the mayor Johann Junius, an educated, respected man. He knows there is no chance. The torture continued until he heard himself say words he would never have said voluntarily. Before his execution, Junius writes a letter to his daughter. I am innocent, but I must say that I am guilty. Otherwise, I will not be able to bear it. This letter is evidence that suspicion no longer distinguished between social classes and titles. If even the mayor of the city is powerless, then who is protected? Ask yourself, which force is more terrifying, the devil to whom he confessed, or the fear that forced him to lie? The witch hunt was not just religious fanaticism. It was a social mechanism that kept the community in submission. Catholic and Protestant lands alike knew this machine of fear. The 30 Years' War raged across Europe. Fields were empty, cities were starving, and the plague was killing people. In times of famine and chaos, the community needed simple explanations. Poor harvest? Someone caused a storm. Disease? Someone put poison in the well. Political strife? Someone sold their soul to the devil. Consider the irony. Several cold summers in a row destroyed the harvest. Grain turned black in the fields. Prices skyrocketed. And what did people do? They sought not solutions but culprits. This is how the psychology of mass fear was formed. It was not chaos but order, a simple explanation for complex misfortunes. Personal insults and debts received theological justification. The enemy was always among us. Destroy him and supposedly things will get easier. But relief did not come. The more flames there were in the squares, the stronger the anxiety became. Even the execution of the mayor did not bring peace. The conclusion was simple. If he could not be saved, no one could be saved. Fear turned into a system. Society was devouring itself. And when the bonfire died down, it left not peace, but a hunger for new victims. You descend the narrow stairs to the basement of the old town hall in Würzburg. The dampness presses on your chest, and the cold stone feels damp even in summer. Iron rings are still visible on the walls. Some are almost at floor level. This is how the exhausted or children were fastened. In Bamberg, they even built a separate witch prison, Drudenhaus, specifically for those who were awaiting interrogation and torture. Here, people sat for weeks and months in the dark, awaiting their verdict. Archaeologists have found the remains of bonfires on the outskirts of cities. Charred bones, fragments, traces of fire. The city books contain dry lines, expenses for firewood, payment for executioners, candles for night interrogations, and even prices, how much was paid for arrest, for detention, for execution of the sentence. Note the detail. Fear was calculated in the accounting department, and this mathematics of horror has been preserved on paper. Today, in Trier, Bamberg, and other cities, these basements are shown as Hexengefängnis, witch prisons. Tourists see stone, but stone speaks louder than archives. It holds memories longer than paper. Note, these rings still show signs of wear from iron. This is not a legend or a myth. It is a reality that lasted for centuries. And that makes it even more terrifying, because if the basement preserved the screams of dozens, then entire cities preserved the silence of thousands. Look at a small town in the 16th century. Wooden houses, a market, a church tower. Now imagine this square a few months after the trials began. There are almost no women. Those who remain are afraid to speak, afraid of their neighbors' glances, afraid to even leave their homes. Trier, 1581 to 1593, about 1,000 executed. Among them, priests, university students, officials. Ask yourself, how did the city feel when it lost its teachers and doctors? Who will teach the children tomorrow? Würzburg, 1626 to 1631. Nearly 900 victims in 5 years. The lists include children's names. Notice the absurdity. When a 9-year-old's voice becomes evidence, fear takes on a new norm. And then there were villages where, after the trials, there were almost no adult women left. Among those convicted were midwives and healers. Without them, the risks of childbirth increased, epidemics spread, and the community weakened even more. Think about it, how little it took for an entire village to cease to exist as a living organism. In total, between the 15th and 18th centuries, between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed in Europe. Some estimates put the figure as high as 100,000. More than half of these deaths occurred in German lands, precisely where fear was intertwined with war, famine, and plague. Imagine that you are a peasant who sees his wife being led to the stake. Imagine a child standing in the square, not understanding why his mother is disappearing. What is more frightening, the flames themselves or the silence that follows? Because the fire went out, but the silence remained, and it was louder than bells. And even when universities were already operating in Europe and the ideas of the Enlightenment were being born, wood was still crackling in city squares. History was supposed to put an end to it, but it did so much later than we think. The square is empty. The fire has died down. People are slowly dispersing. Some are crossing themselves, some are silent, some are glad that this time it was not their name that was called. But the village is becoming even quieter. The voices, singing, and laughter of children are disappearing. The silence is louder than the bells. 1782, Switzerland. Anna Geldy was executed for witchcraft at a time when the ideas of the Enlightenment were already spreading across Europe. The world seemed to be entering a new era, but the old fear had reached here too. Several centuries passed before Germany and Switzerland symbolically rehabilitated the victims. 400 years later, too late, perhaps, but it was an attempt to fill the void at least a little. Today we say, that's in the past. It's archaic. But has the mechanism itself disappeared? Note, when society looks for a simple culprit for complex problems, it is an echo of those same processes. Europe built universities, science, and a new philosophy, but another sound still lingers in the stone basements. Not bells or chorales. Silence. The silence you hear when you leaf through yellowed protocols. The silence you see in the iron ring in the wall. It is the silence that is the most terrible legacy of the bloody witch hunt.